Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I will be bringing you part 2 of my first impressions for the big FAQ that was released a couple of days ago. In part 1 I talk about the changes to the main rulebook and the new beta rules that are being tested out. And there will be a link in the description if you would like to check that out. But for this video, I will be going over everything that I didn't cover in the first video, which will be some of the changes to stratagems, the actual FAQ questions and answers, and some of the points adjustments for certain units. Before I get into the actual content of this video though, if this is your first time on this channel and you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content. With that said, let's talk about some of the changes. So in the last video, I talked about a rule called Battle Brothers that states that a detachment can no longer use the keywords Chaos, Imperium, Eldari, Inari, or Tyranids, meaning suit detachments are pretty much dead. This frustrated a lot of people who own certain units that belong to factions that don't come with any HQ options like the Assassins and Officio Assassinorum. There are a couple of new rules being added that allow you to actually still use these units in detachments other than the auxiliary detachment. Sisters of Silence, Legion of the Damned, and Assassins can all go in their own Vanguard detachments and do not need an HQ as long as your Warlord has the Imperium keyword. But you don't get any command points for that Vanguard. This allows people to play with these models even though they do not have an HQ choice, which is great. Sure, you don't get any command points for bringing them in a Vanguard, but at least you're not paying command points for an auxiliary detachment, which would be the only other way to use these guys in a Battleforged list. So overall, I think this is a great addition for people that still want to use those models with the current list restrictions. So all of you Sisters of Silence, Legion of the Damned, and Assassin players, you can still use your units in a Battleforged list without the auxiliary detachment. Next thing I'm going to talk about is that the Inari characters get a similar rule that allows them to fit into any Craft Worlds, Harlequin, or Drukhari detachments, so they are still playable as well. If one of those characters is used in one of those detachments though, everything in that detachment gains the Inari keyword, so it changes to an Inari detachment. But it also retains its normal keywords, so you can still have access to either the Craft Worlds, Drukhari, or Harlequin stratagems. You cannot, however, have any Homunculus Covens, Mandrakes, or certain characters in these detachments, so there are restrictions. Any unit in the Inari detachment also lose access to Ancient Doom, Battle Focus, Rising Crescendo, Power from Pain, and instead, Bikes and Infantry gain the Strength from Death ability, which I think is the way that it used to work before, or at least it's very similar. Overall, I think these changes are fine and absolutely kill the way Inari has been being played for the last few months. These changes, combined with the changes to the reserves in Deep Strike and being able to move your units out of reserve, really hurt the playstyle of the army and is going to force Inari players to adapt and find a new list and or playstyle. The Tide of Traitor stratagem has been changed to a once per game stratagem. This hurts the lists that spam multiple units of 40 cultists, but doesn't necessarily hurt every chaos list. Personally, I only ever used one blob of cultists, and really only ever did Tide of Traitors once per game, so it doesn't really affect me or my list. But I think that's how they are going to be used going forward. Just one blob to use the stratagem on once, and then 10-man units to fill out the rest of the battalion. I think this change needed to happen though, because it's kind of silly if you can reborn a 40-man cultist squad every turn. And with the changes to the amount of command points you will be getting, because you'll be getting a lot more now, it would be way too easy to use the stratagem multiple times, even on just one unit of 40. So I'm glad the change was made, even though it does slightly affect my own army. Word of the Phoenix, which is an Inari spell, has been changed from Warp Charge 6 to Warp Charge 8. This is the spell that allows one of your units to make a Soul Burst action, which is usually a free round of shooting for one unit. This makes the spell slightly harder to get off, but with Avrain, or better known as Cat Lady, she gets a +1 to her spells, so she only needs a 7, which is average on 2 dice. So it's not insanely hard to get off now, but it isn't necessarily as easy as it used to be, because she used to only need 5 on 2 dice, which was insanely easy. This change hurts Inari just a little bit, but I don't think it flat out kills them. It just forces Inari players to not rely on that spell going off every turn now, and on average it will only go off for 3 to 4 turns of the game instead of 6 to 7. To be honest, I think the previous changes for Inari that I talked about are much bigger of a change for this army. This is a minor change, but it's still overall a nerf to Inari, which honestly I think they needed because they were starting to dominate the meta. Even before Hive Tyrants came in, Inari was just dominating, and to be honest, if no one noticed, the reason Hive Tyrants started dominating is because Hive Tyrants are amazing against Toughness 3 models. And if you look at the Inari army that was being used, look at all the models in it. It's mainly all Toughness 3 models. So the Hive Tyrant spam was a legit counter to the current Inari lists, and that's why it was doing so well. Which is why I figured Games Workshop would let things play out and the meta would fix itself, because then people would start countering Hive Tyrants. But instead, Games Workshop just released this FAQ, which just pretty much killed everything. In a good way though, it killed everything, but it left the game in a better state in my opinion. Another change is abilities that ignore wounds like Disgustingly Resilient. They no longer stack with other abilities that do the same thing. So you can no longer take a 6+ Feel No Pain Warlord trait on your Lord of Contagion. Well, like, you can, but it's useless, because then you would either have to pick your 5+ Disgustingly Resilient or the 6+ Warlord trait. So of course you're going to take the Disgustingly Resilient because it's better. So now you just can't have stacking Feel No Pain saves. I personally don't think this change was needed, but there's probably something I am not thinking of, or something that is going to be released in the future that would abuse the hell out of this rule. So I assume Games Workshop had a reasoning for making this change. Overall, I don't think it's that big of a change, and most people probably won't even notice it. Another change is that anything with the fly keyword ignores vertical movement when charging. This means you literally only measure horizontally for your flying units. Meaning if you have a model like Celestine that's 3 inches away from a building and you want her to charge something that's on top of the building, your charge is 3 inches even if the unit is 9 inches above her. This is nuts and is going to drastically change the way assaults and pile-ins work for flying units. Speaking of which, I'm going to group another change in here that goes hand in hand with this one. And that is that wobbly model cannot be used when charging now. So if you can't fit your model up where a unit is on like the top level of ruins, then you can't charge that unit. This means that a model that is standing on a 3-inch barrel is essentially immune to charges. This sounds really dumb, and to be honest, it kind of is. But I can see why the change was made. I can see stuff happening like Death Company landing 9 inches away from a unit of Devastators on the 2nd level of Ruin, but only needing something like a 3-inch charge to make it into combat with how the fly keyword works now. Just like the Celestine example I gave before. So I can see why this change was made, because some really broken interactions can take place now with this new rule. Keep in mind though, sometimes it takes a lot of units to block off the entire top of a building or ruin, so you can still see charges on top floors of buildings, just if your opponent strategically places their guys along the edge that you want to charge on, then you're probably not getting up there. With this change, I can see high ground memes from Star Wars being introduced into 40k, which is absolutely amazing. Prequel memes are the best. And those are the biggest FAQ changes to the game. There are a ton more, but I think most of them were questions that we already had answers to. For example, with one of the new questions that was asked, if you have a berserker who has 2 attacks and he's equipped with a chain axe and a chainsword, does he need to allocate one of his attacks to the chainsword to get the +1 attack from the chainsword? And the answer is no. He can use both his attacks on the chain axe, and he gets a free attack with the chainsword for 3 attacks altogether. It's changes like this that I think were obvious to everyone, but just needed to be written down and so they could be official, so people couldn't argue about them, even though we all knew the intent behind it. In fact, if you watch my videos, you'll see that I've actually done the same thing in my videos with my Demon Prince, because I would use his sword to attack, but then get 1 extra attack with his claw, because that's what his claw said, you get 1 extra attack with this. So again, it's like everyone knew that this was the rule, but because of rules lawyers and people in tournaments that will argue anything so they can get a win, well, this just stops them from being able to argue this stuff now. So again, because all of these changes are kind of like obvious, like we saw them coming, like we know that this is how it was supposed to be played, we just needed an official ruling on it. So after this, I'm not going to talk about any more FAQ questions because again, I think it's redundant. Now let's talk about some of the changes made to the points cost of certain units. First off, let me say I'm not going to mention every change because some of them are insignificant. So let's start with Dark Reapers. They went up in points.
Hell, it's about time.
Praise be to Khorne or Slaanesh or the Emperor or the Omnissiah or whatever entity you follow. I think everyone is happy with this change, including the Eldar players, because it wasn't fun winning a game because of a clearly undercosted unit, and it got you more hate than respect for abusing it. I think they will still be used, but not as much as they were pre-FAQ, because the Word of the Phoenix spell is now harder to get off, so the combo of having these guys shoot twice every turn isn't as reliable as it once was. Commissars and Lord Commissars went down in points, which is great because absolutely no one was using them since the change to the way their ability works. I can see Commissars being used now a lot more, especially because I can see the meta going very troop heavy in the future because they are the only units other than transports that are now allowed to be spammed. Ravenwing Dark Talons went up in points cost because a lot of people were spamming the crap out of them. And even though you're only allowed 3 now because of the rule of 3 that GW implemented, Games Workshop still felt that they would still be used all the time and that they were too powerful for their points cost, so they adjusted the cost. Guilliman went up in points by another 15. This is where I think the FAQ kind of shows some of its age, because Bobby G wasn't really doing much other than being a gatekeeper to the current meta. Ultramarines haven't been doing so hot lately, so I think the change was probably planned just after Chapter approved, but I could be wrong and maybe Games Workshop still felt he was undercosted, which to be honest, I might get some slack for this, but he probably was. I think 400 is a good cost for him since he's pretty much in line with the other Primarchs now, since their cost went up a while ago as well with the codexes. Or at least Magnus did, I'm not too sure about Mortarion. Hive Tyrants went up in points as well, because kind of like the Dark Talon, Games Workshop suspected that they were still too points efficient and limiting them to 3 wasn't enough. So they adjusted the points to make other options more appealing. I still think you will see them and probably see at least 1 or 2 in every army. I just think it does what Games Workshop intended for this change, which is to make other options like the Swarm Lord more appealing, so that way we start seeing more diverse NIDS lists again. Fire Raptor Gunship went up by a lot of points, for the same reason the Dark Talon and Hive Tyrant did, because Games Workshop felt that they would still be taken at least 3 times, and they wanted to force people to look at other options, because it's not really fun to play against a list with 3 Fire Raptors in it. And that about covers it for all the important changes that came with the big FAQ. Overall, I think these changes are going to shake up the meta a bit, and basically makes me feel the same way I did when 8th first released. It almost feels like a completely different game now, and I can't wait to test out a bunch of stuff and see where the meta is headed. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're already subscribed but want to help support the channel even further, you can do so on Patreon. A pledge of $4 gets you exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, where you can get help with list building or advice for tactics from either myself or other patrons who enjoy the competitive side of 40k just like yourself. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. Thanks for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.